Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of the Game Detectives podcast. Every episode we're going to talk about a game or a game series, what we like, what we don't, as well as some lessons we can take away from the game. We hope you enjoy this episode. Alright, thank you everybody for listening to this episode of the Game Detectives. I am your host, David Kutchik, and I'm joined by my good friend Travis Schultz. Today we're going to be talking about Danganronpa 1. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah, Danganronpa.
Danganronpa. I'm going to get there.
I said Danganronpa for the longest time, so I get you.
And yeah, we're going to talk about the first one, kind of break down which trials we think are successful, which maybe not so much, and then talk about the game kind of in general and celebrate the 10th anniversary of it, which is crazy.
It's an exciting opportunity. Yeah, I mean, this is a 10-year anniversary game, of which me and David just got into last year.
I literally finished all 3 games like between December and January last year.
It was insane. Yeah, it took me maybe 2 or 3 months, but I really got absorbed into this franchise. And it's an exciting opportunity to kind of go and reflect on all that, because it really felt like playing through those games was something I didn't really expect, and it was a gaming experience, which sounds weird, but a gaming experience that I will reflect and think about for a long time. Like, there's ideas and characters and stuff in this game that I think about a lot.
Yeah, definitely. So for those of our listeners who might not be familiar with it, I thought we'd just do a little breakdown of what the game actually is. So basically, you're this high school student. Oh gosh, I'm already blanking on your character's name.
Makoto is the protagonist of the first one.
Makoto. I was thinking Kamaida, but that's for next episode.
We'll get there.
Makoto, who is thrown into this school that's basically kind of taking inspiration from the Japanese film Battle Royale, in which schoolmates in high school are kind of pitted against each other in a killing game.
It's kind of a perfect thing too, because I think this is around when the Hunger Games was really popular.
Yeah, I think this was kind of right after the first 1 or 2 were published.
Yeah.
And that takes heavy inspiration from, and not necessarily directly, but Battle Royale was made in the 1990s, I think, late 1990s.
And we should just add, actually, too, it's impossible to talk about any of the games in this series for more than a minute without spoilers. So basically, Everything said is going to be a spoiler.
Yes.
That's the name of the game here.
Yes, spoiler alert. Basically, the only thing that you need to know about the game, we just told you. So
yeah, it's a beautifully simple concept. You get 16 or 15 high school students. Each one is the best in their chosen field, and they're put in a position where if you are able to successfully kill another one of the students and not get caught, you escape. If you do get caught, you die. If the people guess wrong, everybody dies. And that's the concept they stick throughout.
Yeah, and so when you see the icon or the box art of the game, you might have seen I saw the Monokuma, who's a
I was familiar with
bear.
that. I think it's the mascot for Spike Chunsoft now.
Yeah, so I've seen the memes, and I've seen pictures of that bear way more than any of the other characters in the game. And so Monokuma is kind of this all-knowing, all-powerful bear machine thing that communicates directly with the students and tells them what the game is. And so there's this kind of spoken assumption that there's somebody or some group controlling Monokuma who's in charge of this whole operation. And part of the game is figuring out trials, which we'll talk about later, but kind of as you go along, you also are trying to figure out why you were put here in this old school that looks kind of like the school that you went to. Why is this organization doing what it does? And so that's also a mystery that unravels.
It's kind of hard to pin the game down in terms of gameplay. You could call it a visual novel. I don't think that's entirely accurate. You could call it a point and click. I don't think that's accurate. Maybe adventure game. I mean, it takes influences from all those things. It takes influences from Ace Attorney. It takes a lot of influence from, I think, like Agatha Christie, which is kind of the obvious type stuff. But I mean, like you're talking about Monokuma, he's like a silly Japanese UN Owen. The tropes are very much, you read And Then There Were None, you read Murder on the Orient Express, and you can definitely see that they took a huge, and that's kind of the point, is that each character fits a trope, and I guess that's prevalent through all mystery type stories.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we can kind of return to at the end, as well, kind of when we're wrapping things up. I do think there's something very interesting going on in that, like, it's a game that's been informed by a lot of different backgrounds, and I feel like the characters, what's really helpful in like figuring out who the characters are and also like kind of understanding them are their talents. And so, like, it's a really quick and easy way to, like, get familiar with all the characters.
It helps you remember them if you don't remember the name. Okay, I know the one who is the pop star, the one who's the detective. It makes it a lot easier to figure out. And that's what they do in those murder novels. You have the doctor, you have the engineer. It's a very good idea to... When you're throwing 16 characters and you really do need to keep track of who everybody is, it's a great way to do it. And they have great character designs, too. Everybody stands out with their silhouette very intentionally.
Yeah, so I think this can kind of lead us into the first trial then, as we're talking about these characters, is that something that the game, like, knows and plays with a lot are, like, anime tropes. And, like, I feel like it very deliberately, like, takes this trial and then, like, almost like with a winking eye, kind of like very Japanifies, quote unquote, it, where like it takes these tropes and then once it establishes all of it, then it's like, all right, now we're going to throw it all out the window.
It's the best type of twist, David. It's the kind of twist that you go, oh, wow, I feel stupid. They've really tricked me. I assumed that I knew what this was going to be. And you go, okay, yeah, I've seen anime before. Because it very plays up this like, oh, Makoto and the first victim of the first trial, Sayaka, they went to high school together. Oh, they're being friendly. It's like they got crushed on each other. Oh, no, she dies. He's going to avenge her. It very much plays on exactly what you would expect from a very generic kind of high school anime. And you think you know where it's going, and it makes you feel foolish. And that is the best kind of twist.
Exactly. So, kind of tracing the trajectory of the game, like, you, as Makoto, you go to Hope's Peak Academy. You were chosen as, like, the ultimate lucky student because you were able to go to the academy because of this, like, random prize drawing. Basically, like, to go to the academy, you have to be, exceptional in a certain field. Makoto was just lucky. When he goes to the academy, all this craziness happens. He's in this battle royale game. Him and Sayaka, who is the ultimate pop star, they know each other. They form a bond right away. Sayaka is very your typical kind of like, I don't know if there's like an anime word for the type of character she is, but she seems like very much your typical like character that would appear on like
it's
a
the
dating
girl
sim.
next door. It's and it's really great because I mean there's a lot of very intentional things done with this first trial.
Yep.
It's played very conventionally, and then there are two things that set this in stone. This is really what creates the series. I think without this first trial playing as it does, you don't have people sticking through this 15-20 hour game. You don't have people sticking through this series. You have the incredibly, I think it's one of the most violent, because at the end of every trial there's an execution and you see a quick cutscene of a child being murdered. And I do think this is one of the most brutal, and I think that's
totally
very meant to set the tone. But then you get this wonderful, completely unnecessary twist that, in fact, Sayaka, your, I guess, romantic interest, as they're trying to frame it, was actually trying to sort of trick you into looking like... She was trying to commit murder and make everybody think you did it. She didn't have a crush on you. And I think that's a really important touch. And even more so, it's not about her being evil or hateful, but it's more meant to emphasize the corners that people can be pushed into when they're desperate, because they've just shown that her career and the career of all her friends is in jeopardy. And it's less that she hates your character, but more so she's pushed into a place of desperation. I think that's a key thing, is how little malice is actually throughout this series, and it's more just victims of circumstance.
Yeah, I think what's important about the first trial is that it gets you familiar with the format. It's not a very difficult trial to figure out who committed the murder. Because the very first thing you see, so like Sayaka is pretending to be this like stereotypical like dating sim girl where she's like afraid of like these other people and she wants you to protect her. So she's like, I think someone's gonna attack me, so let's switch rooms. So then when they see I'm not in my room, then they won't attack me. And then she invites Leon, one of the other characters, over to her room in the middle of the night, which is now actually your room. And she tries to kill him, and then he, in self-defense, kills her. And when you walk into the murder scene, you see that Sayaka, like, on her last dying breath, wrote something in her blood, and it's 11037 is what it looks like, but obviously, like, if you're looking for clues, like, if you just turn it around, it says Leon. So
That's really, the only puzzle placed here. And I think what I know is that that's unchanged from the Japanese version, so it's a little bit more of a complex puzzle then because it's English characters. But you have a variety of stuff. The best trials in this game all either have a very interesting puzzle to them and almost more often than not include an interesting question about ethics or morality. Yeah. Well, this one doesn't have a lot of puzzles. It does throw a lot of curveballs at you, like the fact that the first execution victim is self-defense, but that doesn't matter for the rules of this game.
Yep, exactly. So then Sayaka dies, this character that you kind of expect is going to be your companion throughout the game, dies. You find out that Leon didn't mean to kill her, but he ends up being executed anyway, by basically, he's like the ultimate baseball star, so he basically gets like bludgeoned to death by like a whole bunch of baseballs. And like both a very over the top and like kind of comedic way, but then also like very played straight in a game that like makes you it's like it's doing this really cognitive dissonance really well, where it's like you have this very anime-esque background where like it's supposed to be like people are getting murdered, but you don't really think it's going to be that graphic or that violent. And then when it goes there, then you're like, oh crap, like this is actually going to be what it is. Like,
and the fact that you are the player taking part of that becomes a much more important thing as the series goes on too.
Yeah. And then you find out Sayaka tried to kill you, or not kill you, but tried to frame you too. So then it definitely kind of blows everything out of the water. It takes what you expect the game to be and takes those tropes and purposely kind of like messes with them in order to get you off balance for the rest of the game, which I think works really well because I haven't played an Ace Attorney game, but I have played like other puzzle style games, not this kind of game. But like usually they play it very straight from the hip because they're like, oh, it's the first trial or it's the first, big event. Mm-hmm. We want you to get familiar with the mechanics, so we're going to kind of play it easy for you.
This is a much better, I think, example of the whole, because I love Ace Attorney games, but playing Danganronpa made me realize how basic those games are, because those games don't really, I mean, despite it being a game about law, they don't really ask any questions about morality or like letter of the law. It's, again, played very straight. I guess there's some kind of stuff with him towards the end being a bit of like a crooked lawyer, but really that's more of a plot point than a game. This is a game where the ethics and morality are part of the plot, but it's also part of the gameplay itself.
Yeah.
That's just a really interesting thing about how well they meld. And again, using gameplay, you could maybe, raise an eyebrow because you are mostly just selecting text boxes, but there's a franticness to it. There's an energy that kind of keeps you tense. It's not a normal trial. It's a very, I don't know, how would you describe it? Like a theater in the round.
Yeah. It's like theater in the round plus graphic, in a sense, kind of graphic novels almost, and the way they design some of the screens, point and click in kind of ways, mini game. It's kind of hard to explain. I might just throw in a video here of a quick bit of a trial.
David, I mean, we don't have to explain that much.
Yeah.
We don't have to synopsize that much.
Yeah.
If somebody's listening to this, they've probably
know
played
what
the
it
game,
is.
so
Yeah.
they don't need the rundown.
Yeah, it's
they
true.
get it.
Yeah.
Which I think brings to I'm very interested, less in terms of what happens, but more in terms of your thoughts of the second trial, which was the one that kind of deals with masculinity and gender.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have this part where two oh gosh, I'm gonna blank on their names already. The two men who are like kind of doing this man off.
Yeah, it was Mondo and Takahata, I believe,
Yep.
or Taka.
Yep, Mondo and Taka, and like I feel like this is also kind of, I mean, you see this in like anime where it's like two very like, I mean, like Dragon Ball, for example, is like a stereotypical example, but you see this in other anime too, and other stories where it's like two guys trying to, outman each other. And then it takes a turn.
I would just like to put on the record that David has never watched an episode of Dragon Ball.
I know. But, like, I'm not saying that's what it is, but I'm saying, like, you could see that as, like, the stereotypical, like, power versus power kind of thing. But when Chihiro, like, ends up dead in the... He's in the women's bathroom when he's dead. Yeah.
It's an interesting example of how it is, in some ways, a criticism of sort of antiquated ideas of masculinity, especially in Japan, but at the same time falls victim, or at least kind of plays into those same potentially antiquated ideas.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of the relationship the game has to other cultural products in general, is that, like, if you are going to take these tropes and subvert them, you also are maintaining a part of, like, perpetuating them in some ways as well, because you're still presenting them in a way that reminds and calls back upon kind of these antiquated ideas about gender, for example. Japan, it adds an extra layer because it's coming from Japanese makers for a predominantly Japanese audience, especially in this first one.
Yeah, I don't think it. I think it took a while before this hit off in the West.
So like the I would say like asking questions about like gender and what makes somebody masculine is in general something that games probably don't do a whole lot of, especially when you talk about like a male character who's presenting as a woman. Because
but I think what works about it is it's not about a male character present. That's an element of it.
Yeah.
But the criticism is the other character, Mondo, and his inability to understand his own masculinity or like his own place there. It very much takes a critical look at that. And the fact that they're presenting against gender is really more of a plot point or something to kind of add to the mystery a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard.
It depends. I think it also kind of depends when you figure out. When I played this, I figured it out right away. I understood immediately what the mystery or what the twist was. And I think they make it kind of obvious. I was actually surprised to figure out a lot of people playing didn't understand this till it was like revealed. And I think if you find it out early on, it's less of like that element of it being the shock and twist and less of that being a sideshow and more just a smaller piece of the puzzle.
I do think something that it does well is that it's used as a plot twist kind of, but it's not like, oh, he was actually a man, and it paints the character as somebody who is like contemplating with their identity and like is finding comfort in who they actually are and who they want to be. And it doesn't, like, there are other movies or like mysteries where you're like, oh, that person was actually like transgender and that makes them the villain, is like a very popular trope in a lot of like horror movies and mystery novels and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
so the fact
like
that
I don't know why it's kind of like a I don't know, body horror or just like a throwback to things being weird and queer. I'm not sure, but that is a thing.
So it is this complicated balance act because it's like it kind of does trivialize it by making it like a plot twist. It also it also respects the idea of somebody trying to answer those questions about their own identity. And then Mondo, I think what's also good about it too is that Mondo is like struggling with his own identity, as like this masculine figure. He's trying to like regain that
He's trying to
kind of
block
sense.
out the fact that he inadvertently caused the death of his brother.
Yeah.
And he feels the guilt for it. And I think that is actually what elevates this case. I think this might be, if not, I mean, maybe we'll come back to this, but I think this might be the only case in the entire series where the murder isn't premeditated. And there's a lot of build-up earlier in this case about Toko being a split personality serial killer. I think that stuff's really stupid. I think it's really obvious that that's not what it's supposed to be. And I think the writer of this game thought that those parts were really funny because it happens a lot. And Toko is one of the few characters to come back in other games. And it's not funny. I think it's really obvious. But, I guess they needed something to kind of it doesn't tie in either. If they had kind of a red herring that tied in more with gender or masculinity, I would like that more. But this just feels like a non sequitur. And then there's a really stupid moment. They build up and they're like, Genocide Jack doesn't set up his killings like that. And that's obvious, too. They show you a picture, and you know that they always do it with scissors.
It's not the same. Yep.
And they say, oh, well, how did it get like that? And then Byakuya just says, oh, I did that to make it more fun. That's one of the stupidest moments in this entire game. I think it doesn't fit the character. I think it doesn't make it any... See, we'll come back to this a lot, too. But good mysteries... The best mysteries, the ones that make you feel excited, you need to have all the pieces. And we'll come back to this, as I think even in this game. But if there are parts of it where you were never given any piece, it's not satisfying. It's just completely, it's frustrating.
We'll talk about in DG2. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, we'll get to...
Yeah. I do think that they were trying to do something interesting with gender on everyone thinks that Genocide Jack is a man. Turns out to be a woman, but not like in a gender reveal kind of way, but more just like, story. Like there's a story. There's this idea of Genocide Jack. He turns out to be Genocide Jill. Whatever.
I could see that. I see what they're trying. It was too obvious.
I see what they're trying to do, but I do think it's less successful.
Because they really early on, it's like Genocide Jack only kills young, attractive men, and especially if you're familiar with anime tropes and like the yandere trope of like the kind of psycho girl that if you're familiar with that, which I guess maybe not everybody is, but if you're playing Danganronpa, you're probably a weeb on some level.
Yes.
So it's just it actually really Toko is one of my least favorite characters in the entire series.
I agree. I was hoping that is it bad that I was hoping they would die like that she would die next.
They do have that. I don't know if you had it. They have that really kind of disturbing fake ending where what's her name? Hina is like pregnant with everybody else's kid, and then they're just holding a picture of her, and it's never explained. But I guess the implication is that she just died.
Yeah, that was so weird. That was dumb. We'll get there. Yeah. I thought that decision was stupid, but that's another thing.
Do you want to talk about the third case?
Yeah. So I actually really enjoyed the third case.
Oh no,
I did, but here's why. So I think this was a point where they're like, we've had two serious cases where it's like emotional gut punch for the player in the first one, where like everything you think is going to be like done differently. The second one where it's like you have it very character oriented, very plot oriented, very much about like the characters outside of you, with the Genocide Jack stuff, which does kind of takes away from that. The third one is like, let's have fun. And let's, like, make a case that isn't so much about necessarily, like, bad people, which in a way is, like, makes it more compelling when it's, like, this is a good person who, in a moment, had a bad lapse in judgment, and they have to pay for that in the case of Bondo, or were defending themselves, and they have to pay for that, as in Leon. This time, it's, like, Celestia's, like, the mastermind behind it, and it's, like, she has no qualms about doing it, which is interesting. Not as necessarily interesting as the first two. I do like that it's a little more... Even though there's two people that die, it's like there's like more levity to it.
Well, I agree with you on one part, that I do think this is a satisfying and reasonable conclusion for Celestia's character. I think the series does a really good job at kind of giving every character a moment. Chihiro, like the character from the last trial, their moment is after their death. Like once their
Yep.
death is given context, you really come to appreciate that character more. And even Mondo, things happen during the trials and the deaths that make you really remember and feel for that character. The two characters that die here, Hifumi and Taka, are given nothing remotely. I mean, you could maybe say it's funny. I didn't think it was that funny. I don't think there's any moments of connection with these characters, and it feels like a huge waste, especially how much time they've spent on Taka's character ahead of time. He's had a lot of screen time and a lot of dialogue, and he just kind of dies with you. Oh, that's the twist. He just dies, but it's not satisfying. Again, just doing something that's not expected isn't a twist.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I do think it would make more sense, and they do this in the third one. I would think it would make more sense where it's like, oh, like somebody I'm really close to has died. I need to, like, I get that Taka's response to it is to like kind of like go in on himself and like disassociate from the rest of the world. I do think it would be more interesting to see how that would develop over the course of the next 5 cases, or 3 cases, I should say. And maybe this is where Hiro could, go away instead. Like,
yeah, they should have killed him off. I didn't like that he stayed till the end.
Yeah, so like I do think because the Taka is probably the part that it like makes the least sense in this trial, is that there has been so much emotional investment in him. Hifumi is meant to be like a ridiculous character.
Yes, and I do think each game kind of has a gag character.
Yep.
But another key thing, and this helps the character stand out, is you usually have a moment where each character gets to demonstrate their skill. And
Yeah.
I get that Hifumi, he's like the ultimate he's the ultimate fanfic artist,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
I get it, it's supposed to be stupid, but if there had been some point where that could have played into the plot more, but he really doesn't do anything but make pervy jokes. Even Celestia, there's really no point in the story where her being the ultimate gambler matters. She could have been the ultimate maid or the ultimate like debutante or something like that. Like there's no reason why she had to be the ultimate gambler, and that's something they do better as the games go on.
I agree.
But oh my gosh, I think the way this all plays out is so obvious. It's like, I wonder if the person that keeps running away and saying they're going to be alone and telling us what happened without us seeing it is the one who did it. And then during the trial, right away they do the thing where she's like freaking out and she's losing her accent. And this is something that's mostly in the first game too, is they have the characters lose their cool way too early in the trials. And I get it. I wonder if the character that is spazzing out right now is the one that did it, or the one that's sweating nervously and like vomiting. I wonder if they're the murderer, and I don't like that either so much.
That's true. I agree. I mostly enjoyed it while it was occurring, because I was like interested to see like what's gonna happen next, like because it was obvious that she was going to be the murderer. So it's like, I wonder like how this is going to play out. But the problem is, once everything happened, then I was like, oh, it's really obvious what's going to happen.
And I really only felt that like maybe once or twice else in the other games. Usually they're leading me on pretty well. They do a pretty good job. The big twist with this one is supposed to be that Hifumi always uses people's last names to address them. And again, that's something that makes more sense in the Japanese translation. In the English version, you really wouldn't put that together. I don't think most people would, even if you're familiar with how the Japanese do names.
Yeah. And I guess I think especially for like the American localization, it could have been like emphasized a little more in the beginning in order to make that more distinct at the end when he died.
Yeah, they keep a pretty literal localization to it.
Which
in this
works
first
sometimes.
Game. They really go off the trails in the third game, though. There are so many memes in the third game. It's ridiculous. So it's good to see that range, too.
Yeah. The fourth trial is really interesting to me. As we, like, move on, it goes back to being, like, very emotional, because Sakura is, like, a character that I actually really liked.
That's probably one of my favorite characters in this game. And I think that at this point in the game, most people playing wouldn't put together that suicide is an option.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't. just the way the game is presented, it really hasn't even entertained the idea, which is smart because you should have that on your mind from the beginning that that's an option. But they do a good job with the first trade. They never, because you think like, as a throwaway line in the second trade, you'd be like, well, what if she killed himself? But they don't do that, and it's good they use that restraint because that makes the payoff for this so much more rewarding.
Yeah. Again, this is kind of the case where it's like, I enjoyed aspects of the trial. I think they kind of, I see what they were trying to do where it was like every character besides Byakuya and, oh gosh, what's her name?
Hina?
No, Hina. So Hina and Hiro and Toko all like Toko and Hiro. Both
they were all elements of the thing. They were all involved, and they all think they were the murderer.
Yeah, they like both attacked Sakura, and then she was like, Hina, like, go get me this, and like Hina, without knowing it, gives her the poison, and then she dies, and then. I like the idea of like Hina trying to deliberately like confuse the trial because like she's like, I'm so done with this that it's like
that she would rather keep the dignity and have everybody else like she cares more about Sakura than anybody else. They were the ones who were friends, and she would basically rather mislead everyone and just have it die. And it's like, you know what? If you were a teenager in this situation, that is a completely reasonable position to be in. I think that element of it is what makes this one great for me, because that's something I didn't understand the whole time. I thought, oh, is she going crazy? She doesn't understand. Does she not know? And then she says it, and you're like, oh. And this isn't a difficult trial to figure out. I don't think the puzzles are incredibly complex, but this is one where it really doesn't matter because it really takes the time to respect this character and kind of give it an emotional, satisfying conclusion where you go, wow. And this kind of is the one that raises the stakes, because the last one was so goofy. This is the one where it's like, wow, there's not that many people left, and we are really being played with here. And it's like, again, it's like this is one where nobody needed to die. This is a completely preventable one. And I think that kind of is what kicks things into gear for sort of like the last two in this game are kind of the final act. They're
I wonder, and this is something that might be interesting, is like in Japan, like suicide is I don't know if it's like necessarily talked about less than it is here.
Well, she's in the context of the game too, she's like a warrior character, so the concept of like an honorable death would maybe make more sense. But maybe you're right that I think this almost works better without that information. I think the more taboo, or I'm not even sure exactly, I guess.
Yeah, like I'm just thinking like for Hina's actions to be like, I want my friend to be honored by not being like besmirched by this trial.
Yeah,
basically.
and I'm not sure. Yeah.
I wonder if that's like more of like something in Japan where it's like if somebody commits suicide, obviously there's been a stigma here in the United States for a long time about it too, and it's just like starting to kind of, become more talked about. I wonder if there is more of a stigma in terms of like community people like outside of the family knowing about suicide. I'm not saying there is or there isn't, but that might like raise the emotional stakes in that sense as well.
I think the fact that she's a woman, both characters that we're talking about are women, also play into that. Because while I do know that it is more common among men in Japan, I think maybe the fact that it's a woman was what you would make it take it more seriously, I guess, if that makes sense.
It's like it's definitely a hard trial because like she was one of the like Sakura was one of the ones I wanted to make it till the end. So I'm like,
the ones you want to never make it, and then you're always okay. So at this point, I love Byakuya. I don't really know why. He's just kind of I enjoy his character. He's funny. I hate Toko. I think Hiro is a really stupid character too, and I guess that's the point, maybe to frustrate you.
But see, his goofy character would have made more sense in the last trial, like being killed, where it's like, it's a goofy trial, we're gonna take the goofy characters away, which does kind of happen in the other games. So like, I think that would have made more sense here. Maybe they were trying to keep like a character around who was like a goofball till the end, but again, like I think a character like Taka could have had that and utilized that character development
I think the
But anyway.
problem is the way they present Yasuhiro's character is in a way that unless there's some sort of absurd twist, which I'm giving no foreshadowing for, he would never be a murderer. So that's
Yeah.
the problem is I feel like he's a waste of a slot in every trial because I know he didn't do it, unless if he did do it, then it's a horrible trial because they've just set up this character to be completely incompetent
Yeah.
in every sense.
Yeah. So the fourth trial then...
That was the fourth, actually.
Oh, sorry. The fifth trial then is... It's, like, hard to explain. I don't know how I feel about this one. I don't know how I
kind
feel
of
about
blend it together. I guess there's two big twists. So the big deal for this is there was actually a 16th student named Mukuro Ishiba. Is that the name? I think it is.
Yeah.
Who is the ultimate assassin. And they found out first of all, they foreshadow this from the very beginning. And the second, this is one of those things that they do a really good job of. Danganronpa, in their first hour, they sneak in so many little things that if you're paying attention for, like right away, they'll say something like, aren't there supposed to be 16? And this is a game that doesn't just give you information. If they're saying something like that, that means pay attention.
Yeah.
So I had a pretty good idea that there was a hidden student going around. So they build that up, and they build that the student's the assassin. And you go, okay, well, the assassin's the one killing everybody. Well, now the assassin's dead. And I guess the main complicated part of this trial is because the body is disfigured and destroyed, they can't, I guess...
They can't...
There's no way to prove.
Yeah, so they're like, well, it has to be the 16th student. They don't know who the 16th student is. They know that, like, they exploded, this student did, but, like, in the Monokuma file and everything, they can't prove a cause of death.
And
they can only prove, like, time frames, like who was with other people at this time, who would have had time to go and set things up.
And it's nobody at the end of the day because it was...
Except for there's all this weird stuff with Makoto where it's like, well, he was kind of hallucinating in this little bit, so, like, he could have been the killer. And the game does kind of put that trope in where it's like, it was actually your character all along who did it, but then they, like, take that and they obviously flip it on its head again, where, like, it's not actually what it was.
This is where things really start to you start to get real hints towards the end game, because they also show, I believe, that the character has Junko's fingernails and hair.
Yep.
So you're kind of led to believe that it's Junko's body. But then they're able... Yeah, that's what... Because Junko is a character that died unceremoniously earlier in the game.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, she's the real mastermind of this. And I think this is like a little niblet. A little niblet.
Yeah. Yeah, so, like, as you're investigating... What I appreciate about this trial is that as you're investigating it, you're kind of finding other clues that don't directly relate to the trial, but you as a character... And they don't even point it out, but, like... You will notice, like, on the body, there are these weird fingernails, and that doesn't come up in the fifth trial, but it does come up in the sixth trial. Or, like, when they talk about the freezer with all of the dead bodies in it, you're like, why is one unlocked? Like, why is this one open? They don't really talk about it in the fifth trial, but then they talk about it in the sixth trial, so I do appreciate that part of it.
Every Danganronpa game has a mystery in the background that you're trying to solve the whole time, and that's basically what's going on. And that's what the last trial is going to be, is what's going on. I will say, I had no idea that Junko was going to be the mastermind. I did not put that together. I will say, when they said it, which I think is right after this,
basically.
there is... I immediately went, oh, because I thought it was weird in the beginning when Makoto has that scene where he goes, oh, you don't look as pretty as you do in the magazine or something like that. And I thought of that, and I went, oh, that is interesting, because they did build this up. And I do think that that character was killed kind of unceremoniously, but I did not put it together.
So, before we get to the end, what I don't like about the fifth trial is, and this is something that kind of, with Chihiro, they don't really give a good reason why Chihiro would save you, as opposed to saving, oh gosh, who's the other one? Because there's like a point in the fifth trial.
Kirigiri, the detective?
Yes. Kirigiri.
I think that was her name.
Kyoko. Yeah, Kyoko.
Kyoko. Okay.
There's like this point where people think it might have been you or it might have been her, and then if you don't trust her, then she dies, and then you have that weird scene where like Hina has people's kids and whatever.
Oh yeah, you know
And
what? And I remember that. I completely forgot
but
about that.
so like she dies, but then if you take the blame and then everybody votes you and you're the killer, for some reason Chihiro saves you. So it's like, did it would make sense if like Chihiro and Kyoko like had a beef or something beforehand, but like why this kind of gets to the point where like the plot twist and the plot twist and the character and the plot have to be in sync in order for things to make sense. And so something like this was just kind of like, I don't know if this really makes sense.
I think it could have worked if okay, so let's say for example the theme of the game was trust. And the whole point of the game is you need to just try, and you could maybe say that like, oh, you need to trust that Sayaka leaves the information to do this. You need to trust that you say, but I really don't think that's given far enough for you to go, okay, I know I need to trust because that's the other games have great theming and that theming ties in with the last trial. But this one, it's really just kind of plain and simple hope versus despair. Like I feel like it's played very straight, and I feel like the way that it's presented. To me, when I played this, I didn't understand that I was supposed to just trust Kirigiri, and I don't think the game builds to the fact that you should trust her. In fact, if anything, the game is kind of presenting that nobody should be trusted, not even yourself. So it's like, I think that's a very non-intuitive moment.
Yeah, so I think it's just kind of jumbled up a little bit there. Kind of similar in other ways to like Toko, for example, previously, where it's just like, it doesn't make much sense. Like it's a plot twist, but it doesn't make much sense within the terms of the plot and the characters. The sixth one I think is really interesting. I kind of put two and two together when that Junko might have been the killer because I knew that something weird was going on with the fifth body that they found. Where it's like this 16th student, like why would they suddenly randomly appear? It doesn't make much sense unless like there were other ways to happen. So I do like the idea that like you kind of have to go back to like the very beginning and think like, okay, who was unaccounted for in these times? Like who can we prove died and who can we not prove died? And so like, I think that's interesting.
Yeah.
When you go back and you're like, well, we saw Junko die, but like nobody ever really like was able to like see the dead body, you know, like you
well, they actually explained that pretty well too, because okay, so at that moment that was actually Mukuro who got killed, and she didn't know, despite being in on the thing, she didn't know that she was being killed. So that moment was genuine surprise for the character. So it makes sense that it played out like that. I would have appreciated if there had just been some sort of hint that one of the characters has a twin. I could have put it together if there was just some hint, because that's what it makes sense. Okay, that's why their bodies would be the same. That's why women say is they're twins. But that's kind of just dropped on you. It's whatever. Other people have been able to put it together. I didn't. Maybe I was just being dumb.
No, I don't think you're very dumb. I think for me it was just like it would make the most sense if Junko was the mastermind, just because if it's a student who's the mastermind, you've like every other student has been able to like interact with the dead bodies or like the people who have died. So I think it made the most sense. I do think I like the little bit where when Junko's twin dies, you know, who's posing as Junko, and she says something like it wasn't supposed to be like this, or like why me or something. I think maybe if there was even just like one more sentence there.
Yeah, I
think
like, you're right.
Just like a tiny little tidbit more where you're like, oh, she thought that she was going to live, but not for this exact reason. Like she wasn't expecting that in a different kind of way. I think that would have helped a little bit too. I do think, though, in this trial, you are right in that it's played a little too straightforward.
Yeah, it's very much hope is good, despair is bad, being happy when things are difficult is good, being sad and giving into negativity is bad, which is fine. It's the first game in a brand new series, in a brand new almost genre. It doesn't need to be deep thematically. And I guess the ultimate sort of plot twist is that they were being kept in the school really for their own safety. They were supposed to be the future of mankind, and there's really nothing to escape to outside, which I like that twist. I figured that things weren't going to be good when they got out, but I didn't really expect it to be that exactly. And I really like how I think some people don't like this, but how open-ended the ending is.
I agree.
I don't want an epilogue. I don't want, Yasuhiro went and had it's like I don't need that. The whole point, and this actually works well thematically, is the whole point is hope. The answer isn't success or winning. The answer is hope. You have to hope that things will get better.
Yeah.
Again, not super deep, but it's done
Yeah.
well. It looks pretty. It sounds nice.
Yeah, I think in general the theme, right, the themes of like hope, it's and this is something that they do really well in the second and third.
Yes, the second especially.
I do there is this idea of like I think the theme of hope is a little in tension with the gameplay and overall the game in general, is because like hope in a sense kind of has an inactive element to it, where it's like we're like, and that maybe works with the ending where you're like you don't know what's going to happen in the future. But I do think this is something that the second and third game get into well, is like there has to be some kind of action behind it. It can't just be this like blind faith or this blind hope. There needs to be more context to it. And I think that's something that the future games get better.
Yeah.
I do think for how promising it starts, I think especially with the first two trials and the fourth one, I think are all really strong. And so at least in terms of thematics and like character, that like the ending does feel like a little of a letdown, just because it's like I want more of that complicated.
Well, I guess we are lucky
Characterization
enough
going
to
through.
be in the context where I beat the first one and I knew that there were two more coming.
Same.
If you played it just, in 2010 and you didn't really know, and it's like, well, this is because this concept, it's so simple, but there's so much you can do with it. I would be disappointed. I don't necessarily need to see the characters again, but just this world and kind of the way the characters talk and the way things look. It's kind of got that, I think maybe, I don't know if it's the company or the time it was made, but it's almost kind of cheap. But it's done so stylized that you don't
Yes.
matter. Like the characters, models, or they're not even models. They're basically flat little images.
Yep.
The way they spin around. But the music is done so well. The colors are great. So it's like if you don't have the biggest budget or like the most proficient technology, if you make things charming enough, I think this is a good example of how
Yep.
all those elements carry this. So yeah, and it doesn't need the deepest. I mean, if you think about anything, when you have a series, the first is kind of the entry point into the world, just like an understanding of finding your feet.
Yeah.
And I think this is a good job. It's
totally.
probably, if I had to rank, my least favorite one, but I still
Same.
really like it, and it was still a great experience.
I agree.
I think it lacks identity other than being the first. I can very clearly think of visuals and thematics and ideas that identify 2 and 3. This one is just kind of the first one, the one where everything's established.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, like, obviously, when we get to number 3, we'll talk about it more, but, like, you can't have the ending of the third one occur in the first one, because, like, then you start having layers upon layers upon layers, of meaning. I do think it's a good ending just in terms of, like, if they want it to be a series going forward, they do need to kind of have this open-ended idea that something is going to happen in the future, which I do appreciate. Oh yeah, I agree. I mean, it's still good, and like all the things we talked about
It's
are all
great. It's
minor
great.
nitpicks.
It's not even good. It's the like weakest in a series of honestly really great. I don't even want it's one of those things where I don't even want to say it's a good game. It's a 9 out of 10. It's just playing the series was an exciting experience.
Yes.
It's something I remember a lot. I don't know. It's obviously you've already played if you're listening to this, and I don't have any recommendation. But I don't think people would walk away from this kind of feeling nothing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know we talked last time, well, in our first episode about like having a lesson at the end of every episode. I'm kind of thinking not a lesson in terms of like to do outside of the game, as we talked about before, where it's like, oh, like be nice to people and like show affection. I think this time around, a lesson that I'm kind of got from it playing it is that like the twist on expectations is itself like one thing, but I think when you can imbue the characters and the story, and like when you make it feel like this is a twist I didn't see coming, but it's something that feels very lived in and very like something that could happen within this game or movie or TV show, is when it's really impactful. So
character is the doorway to empathy.
Yeah. So like the plot itself is like interesting, and it's like could be something interesting you see on an IMDb page, for example. But like the character is where you start making that connection with the audience and getting them to feel like a myriad of feelings, whether that be like hope or despair or anything else.
If you had to explain that in a more succinct fashion, what would you say?
Oh gosh, I mean, I don't know. What would you say?
I would say what I said before. Character is the doorway to empathy.
Character. I would say that's the same thing. Which is pretty crazy, like, to learn coming from a game where, like, 14.
16.
No, 11. 11 of the characters die, and so, like...
The ones that die are the ones I cared about the most.
I know.
That's
Kyoko,
part of a
though.
lesson, too, is death can be... no, I'm not even going to go there. Never mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we will talk to you next. I don't even know how I'm going to end this. I'm just going to put something over the top.
We'll come back next week with Danganronpa 2. Goodbye, Despair. I
don't know what that was.
That's the theme.
Oh, okay. Bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Game Detectives Podcast. Oh, and don't forget...
A boy and a girl spending the night together? It's unwholesome!
Bye!
Thank you so much for playing my game.